Hello, I'm Hans Hendley. I'm an independent artisan perfumer based in New York City, and I run a small brand called Hendley Perfumes. I focus on making very high quality unisex fragrances that smell great and are a pleasure to wear. I want to say thank you to Peter here at FragranceView for asking me to be a part of this Perfumer Talks series that he's doing. When he asked me, I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said yes. So I have questions that have been submitted by Peter's subscribers and audience, and I'm going to do my best to answer them today. So let's get started. In a way, I've kind of always been into fragrances and smells. I remember when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, quite young, I wanted to make cologne. And so I got like cloves and cinnamon sticks and lemon peels, things like that, and put them in a Tupperware with rubbing alcohol. And so basically making tinctures as my own cologne. Of course, they were in rubbing alcohol, so probably didn't smell so great, but I feel like that's kind of, something I was dabbling in from a very young age. I got introduced to indie fragrances. I kind of was aware of niche at the time, Frederic Malle, Serge Lutens, things like that, but a friend of mine who worked in the industry showed me really independent artisan stuff like Andy Tower, Slumber House, brands like that. And it just kind of blew my mind. I didn't know that people were doing this. I didn't know that perfume making really existed outside of your big designer companies. And so I just kind of became obsessed with learning more about independent perfume and kind of hard to find unusual stuff. I've never been the type of person that's really satisfied with just being a consumer. I like to take things apart and figure out how they work, and I'm much more of a maker and a doer. I guess kind of my obsessive tendencies took over, and I really went down the rabbit hole. I spent several years of kind of late nights and lonely weekends researching, blending, sourcing materials, just kind of figuring it out. It wasn't something that I was telling a lot of people about. It was just kind of my thing that I did in my own time. But eventually I started feeling better about what I was making, and I began to feel more comfortable sharing it with my friends and others, and I got some good feedback. And so I think at that point I decided maybe it might be kind of interesting to have a brand or try to sell some of my fragrances to help pay for this hobby, because it's pretty expensive to build up a library of materials and kind of learn how to make perfumes through trial and error and throw away a lot of these expensive materials. So it's hard to believe that's been nearly 5 years now. I've been, I guess, somewhat unwavering in making this work, but I've also been lucky in that a lot of people have kind of enjoyed the products that I've made and the perfumes that I've offered and have supported me over the years. And I'm very grateful for that. So that's kind of like the short version of how I got here. I wish someone had told me not to listen to people's advice, because I think when I was telling people that this is what I was doing, there would often be opinions about what I should do or where I should go with it. And I realized that the vast majority of people really have no idea how perfume works and how it's made and and especially something that's kind of hyper niche and artisan and really focused on a particular kind of demographic. And so most of the advice that people were giving me is irrelevant and just kind of oftentimes created a mental fog or cloud that really wasn't necessary and could sometimes make me question my vision and of what I was really trying to do. So I would say, yeah, be very selective about whose advice you take. And I think if you really taken the time to define what you're doing, that it's important to stick by that and not let people's opinions steer you off the path. The really good vanilla is known as bourbon vanilla. So it's from the island of Reunion or Madagascar. And it's a particular variety of vanilla that smells a bit different than perhaps Tahitian vanilla or Mexican vanilla. Bourbon really initially existed, I guess, as two separate perfumes I was working on. I was working on a vanilla, kind of smoky vanilla perfume, and then an amber perfume. And at one point I thought, well, what about if I just mix these together? And that really worked, and that's kind of how the fragrance initially began to take shape. And so I was really thinking about, making a vanilla-centric fragrance, a vanilla-dominant fragrance, but one that wasn't particularly sweet, kind of sidestep the tropes of what most people expect a vanilla perfume to smell like. I wanted to focus on the boozy, woody aspects, smoky aspects of vanilla. And so I had the idea to kind of take it a step further and play with that concept of bourbon, not only with vanilla, but in bourbon whiskey. Because that kind of toasted oak, sweet caramelized flavors of bourbon whiskey really kind of complements bourbon vanilla in a lot of ways. And so I started thinking about this idea of maybe an old-fashioned cocktail that has the bourbon and a bit of sweetness and then a bit of citrus on top. So I thought, well, what if I take this a step further and actually mature the perfume in a toasted oak barrel the same way that they mature bourbon whiskey. And so I did an experiment, and I thought it worked really well. It really picked up those toasted oak aromas that you might expect from the nose of bourbon whiskey. Yeah, this is true. I studied fine art photography in college, and after school I spent several years working kind of in the commercial photography business, doing some advertising work, a tiny bit of fashion work, but primarily catalog work for like Neiman Marcus and JCPenney catalogs, and that was my job. I kind of was doing that for work and making kind of my own art photography on the side. I guess there came a point though where I really wasn't enjoying it as much anymore. I think because I was doing this kind of mindless, inconsequential, photographing bed frames for a catalog all day, every day for work, it really made me not want to do photography on my own time as much anymore. I got kind of burned out. And then at the same time I got really into music. I've always been a big music fan. It's been a huge part of my life, but I never considered myself a musician. But I got really interested in kind of making electronic music, like on the computer, like sample-based hip-hop stuff. and kind of dove really deep into that and became obsessed in a way that, I probably became obsessed with perfumery later on. And so I was really, really focused on doing music. I started DJing. I with some friends did kind of like a weekly residency at a local club. It's hard for me to kind of come up with favorites or lists oftentimes. I mean, I consume a lot of photography and music all the time, but I would say in the realm of photography, I really enjoy large format, formal typologies, very kind of analytical, intellectual work. And then I would say if I had to just pick one favorite, it might be the American photographer Stephen Shore. I also really like the kind of large format work of Joel Meyerowitz, the stuff he was doing around Cape Cod. But that's really a lot of the photography that I was into when I was making a lot of art photography, and also the stuff I enjoy looking at, like large format, very slow, thoughtful, precisely composed photographs. And I still do a lot of photography to this day. It's something I enjoy, just taking pictures for aesthetic value or as a way to kind of make sense of information or understand the world around me. And there's also a great side benefit of being a trained photographer is that I can do all my own product photography for my perfume brand. So that's a huge advantage because I don't have to hire and pay people to take my product shots. I can do it all kind of in-house. That there's a cumulative effect of these creative endeavors, each one kind of, helping out the other in a way. This is something I get asked a lot. I think a lot of people who are into fragrance and are fragrance enthusiasts eventually come to this point where they want to learn more, begin creating their own perfumes. So I think it's kind of easier to get into that now than it ever has been, thanks to the internet and information being more readily available. So there's really two parts to this question to me. One has to do with learning to make perfume. The other has to do with doing perfumes as a career. And those things are not necessarily the same to me. There's a difference. So I want to address each of those separately. So learning to make perfume, I always give the same advice. A book by Mandy Aftel called Essence and Alchemy. This right here. So this book is relatively inexpensive. You can order it for probably less than $20, and it's one of the few books available on the market that actually has real usable information about perfume making. So it focuses only on natural perfumery, which is not something that I practice. I use both synthetics and naturals, but I think as far as a foundation and kind of learning the basics and vocabulary, learning the naturals first, I think is a good way to go about it, because a lot of the synthetics that exist and the vocabulary and the ways that we describe even synthetic aroma chemicals relate back to natural material terms. So this book is it's an easy read. It's not that long. The first bit of it is kind of a history of perfumery, but then it goes into really explaining the theory of how to structure a perfume. It has shopping lists in it of like, okay, what do you buy first? What do you buy second when you're ready to move on? Collections of them. It breaks things down into base notes and top notes and middle notes. It has a directory of suppliers in the back, and a few actual formulas that you can mix up yourself, and it's a great learning tool. It's I think the best way to start if you're wanting to learn on your own. Many other kind of indie and artisan perfumers have said that this book was their starting point as well. Andy Tower, Liz Moore's a Papillon Perfumery, and I'm sure many others. So it's called Essence and Alchemy by Mandy Aftel. Mandy is I kind of describe her as like the fairy godmother of indie perfume. She's based in Berkeley, California, and has been making natural perfumes and writing books for many years now. And so she has her own brand called Atelier. She has at her studio kind of a scent museum that you can go visit. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of other great books available to read. There are a handful of older books that are out of print, and you can pay ridiculous prices for used versions of them and whatnot. And I guess those are kind of interesting in a way, but most of those books are actually quite old. So while they do have information and formulae in them, the information and formulae are kind of dated. So even if you do mix up a formula out of one of these books, it's not going to smell contemporary. I mean, I think that's perhaps good for learning, but maybe not practical, and these books are probably not worth the money. So that brings me to the second part of Beyond the Essence and Alchemy book. It's really important to just do it. And this is something I always say to people, and maybe it sounds like that's an oversimplification, but you can spend the rest of your life reading and researching and theorizing, but until you actually start sourcing materials and mixing stuff up and evaluating it and figuring out what works and how things smell, it's not going to make sense. So if it's something that you're really interested in, get yourself some materials, figure out what you're doing, and get started. Mix it up, and you're going to make a lot of stinkers. You know, a lot of it is going to be wasted, and that's just part of it. You just have to accept that and just do it a lot. It takes many thousands of hours of experimentation and learning to figure this thing out, you know. So and of course this is the route that I've taken. I'm a completely self-taught perfumer. I didn't have any apprenticeships or go to any schools or anything like that. So there are a couple of perfume schools that you can go to. There's the Grasse Institute for Perfumery in Grasse, France. There's ISIPCA in Versailles in France that has a fragrance program. So you can go that route as well. Also, most of the big perfume manufacturers like Givaudan or International Flavors and Fragrances have their own schools where, you know, basically the applicants they take on are trained for positions in those companies. So I guess that kind of brings us to the second part of your question, which relates to doing perfume as a career. So I think that requires some reflection to really understand what you want to do. Do you want to be a perfumer that has your own brand and makes perfumes for your brand where you kind of control everything? Do you want to make perfumes for other brands? And of course there's some crossover there, but I think that would probably change the approach you might take to learning. If you want to, make perfumes for a lot of other brands, or, really make a a good living from it. You know, going through these more formal channels might make a little more sense just because of the networks and connections that you can achieve from doing that. However, you know, being an artisan, self-taught indie perfumer is I don't think that's necessarily a great career path. I'm not sure I recommend it. Sometimes I question what the heck I'm doing this for. It's like really hard, you know. So they're very different things, and so I think doing a lot of reflection on what you want out of it, and what if you want to be a perfumer, like what that looks like for you ideally. And I don't think you have to know that before you get started. I mean, you'll kind of realize what's what once you start experimenting and playing around. But there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. So my advice is only based on what I do and what's worked for me, and it's definitely not mainstream or typical or even particularly rational. All of my fragrances that I've released have represent many hours of work and dedication, and there are things I really love about all of them, you know. Usually it's the one that I've completed most recently kind of ends up being my favorite because ideas leapfrog over each other, and I've developed as a perfumer. So yeah, difficult question. I think they're all pretty good. Otherwise, I wouldn't release them or keep making them if I think a fragrance is not good to me anymore. I'm not going to keep making it. I'm not sure when this video is going to go live, but it's today's like March 14th. So I'm releasing a new fragrance at the end of March 2019. So that's what's coming next. That may already be out by the time you see this video, but if not, stay tuned. And I'm also doing something else this year, which is kind of different for me. So last November, I offered a new service that I've called the Laboratory Series, which is basically kind of like a subscriber type of service where I offered a series of 6 perfumes released on a bi-monthly basis over the course of 2019. So every 2 months, the subscriber will receive a new small bottle of perfume in the mail. And these are fragrances that are made specifically for this series and project and aren't available anywhere else. So that's been interesting for me in that it kind of creates a different space I can work in. I can take a few more risks and be more experimental since the expectations are defined a bit differently. It's very limited. I only allowed 33 spots into the service. And so that has already led to 2019 being really productive making wise, which is what I wanted to. I wanted to kind of focus more on making perfumes, which is the part I really like, and less on doing a lot of the marketing and sending things out for review and so forth, because that's actually a lot of work. And additionally, I don't think it makes sense for a brand like mine to do more than, like one major release per year. There's just too much on the market, and cutting through the noise is exceptionally difficult. So this has been a space to still do the work that I love without some of the baggage of all that stuff I just mentioned. So I was just thinking about it actually. so far, through 3.5 months into 2019, I've already made more perfume than I made in all of 2018 because of the Laboratory series, new release coming soon, and I'm also working on some other projects, a project for another brand, and then also I am finishing up a limited edition for one of my stockists, American Perfumer. So I'm doing a 15-bottle limited edition for them. My primary focus business-wise is direct sales through my website, HendleyPerfumes.com. That's, something that really kind of, I think, has worked well for me. It's enabled me to kind of offer things at a more competitive price point because I'm not getting eaten up at the margins with distributors and wholesale. So that's the best place to find my stuff. So I offer a range of sizes. That being said, I do work with just a couple of other retailers. One that I already mentioned is American Perfumer. This is a brick and mortar shop in Louisville, Kentucky, and they focus solely on American perfumers. So they have a curated selection of perfumes from brands that are all made by perfumers based in the United States of America. So I'm fortunate to be in that company, and I think it's kind of an interesting concept and a really beautiful store. They sell online as well, American-Perfumer.com, but it is a beautiful physical store in Louisville, Kentucky. In Brooklyn, New York, my entire line is available at a shop called Fredericks and May in the kind of Crown Heights neighborhood. So it's kind of an art object, home goods shop, and I'm the only perfume line that's carried there, and that's proven to be a nice partnership. So if you're in New York City, that's the best place to go. Check out the line. They have testers and the full range there. I also sell online with IndieScents, They're based in Canada. So if you're in Canada, that's a good option for you. And they ship worldwide as well. So that's the extent of it. But direct sales from my own website is really what works for me. That lets me kind of have the control, the quality control that I need, and the margins that I need to survive.